The red luminescent numbers on the digital clock displayed 4:05 a.m. "Oh no!" Devon forced out in a hushed whisper as he threw the sheet back and pushed himself off the floor mattress, stepping into his tattered old cut-off jeans. He reached out in the darkness to flip on the light switch. His white, scruffy tomcat trotted across the bare plywood floor, through the doorway, into the living room as Devon scanned the room for what he needed to haul out to the porch in readiness for his trip. He eased across the room, removed the row of red bricks from atop the 2 stacked cookie sheets, making sure to make no noise. He picked up the cookie sheets and walked through the door into the dark living room, shifting his 2-handed hold to one in order to feel his way to the kitchen. Devon snuck his bare feet across the dusty plywood floor, careful not to produce unwanted squeaking as he entered the kitchen. He placed 2 fingers on the range hood light switch, applying slightly more pressure to one side than the other to turn the light on without the usual snap. He opened the oven door and placed the cookie sheets on the rack, pulled the top cookie sheet out, then closed the door. He turned the oven on to 200 degrees and checked the time on the stove. The range hood light, combined with the light coming out of Devon's room, revealed that no one was asleep on the living room couches and the door to Ned's room was closed. Devon relaxed a bit and clicked on the coffee maker and headed back to his room. Devon's room was not finished in knotty pine like the rest of the cabin. Fiberglass bats were stapled to the exposed studs on the 2 end walls. The slanting roof of the A-frame was covered in graying plywood, just like the floor. This room was an addition that was not yet completed. It was 10 feet deep and 20 feet long with no windows. A door opened to the living room right next to the large wood stove. The stove had not seen a fire for several months, as it was August and the temperature didn't fall below 80 degrees overnight. Devon grabbed his 2 backpacks and headed into the front room. One backpack carried provisions, and the other was a small gold dredge. He used his shoulder to widen the opening of the sliding glass door to pass through without banging the packs on the door frame. There was no screen. White Kitty, Devon's cat, was laying with his head in the dog bowl, crunching some dog kibble, while Ned's black lab, sporting the gray chin hairs of age, lay in his favorite corner of the deck a few feet away. Devon placed the packs next to the rail near the stairs to the driveway, pet the cat, then turned back through the glass door. To the left sat the wood stove and the door to Devon's room. 10 feet inside the door were 2 tattered old couches in an L shape in front of the TV. Beyond the couches was the counter that framed the kitchen. To the left of the kitchen was the bathroom. Behind the kitchen and bathroom was Ned's bedroom. The area above the living room was open to the apex of the A-frame. On the left side of the room, a staircase climbed up to the loft. Neither had a railing. No pictures hung on the knotty pine interior of the cabin. The floor around the wood stove was covered in dusty piles of ash and wood scrap. The stovepipe rose 20 feet to the roof with large whitened splotches, caused by water intrusion, smattering up its black length. Cobwebs swayed high up in the flow of air, streaming out of the loft window at the far end of the cabin. The ceiling fan, 15 feet above and to the right of the stove, squeaked faintly as Devon flicked on the switch. A warm smell emanating from the marigold-colored oven tended to the odor of skunk. Devon returned to the kitchen to catch the last gurgles and spat of the coffee maker. He poured a cup, taking in the rich smell of the dark roast. The skunk smell was increasing. Devon flipped on the light inside the oven to inspect the color of his baking treat. It was browning well, but needed another 10 minutes or so. He hurried back to the front room and switched on a box fan and moved it to the door to evacuate the smell from the house. It was too late. Devon could hear Ned clearing his throat and coughing up heavy phlegm. "What the hell?" Ned yelled. "Who the hell let a skunk in the house?" The bedroom door flew open and Ned stepped through with a crazed look on his face. Ned was not tall and not short. His dark hair was heavily streaked with gray, both on his head and in his long, bushy beard. He had deep, dark bags under his iridescent green eyes. His skin was olive tan and his muscles rippled with strength. He stood in the doorway in black boxers peering at Devon. It's not skunk, Devin replied. I'm cooking some more of that hash for the trip. You couldn't wait till I was out of the house to cook that nasty shit? Ned barked. They'll be here any minute. I've got to go. Shit, Ned grunted in his gravelly voice. He turned and went into the bathroom and closed the door. It didn't matter. The walls of the bathroom were paper thin. You could hear every noise, no matter how slight. Ned had a good flow. The sound of his urinating seemed amplified in the darkness of the morning. He snorted, cleared his throat, and hurled a large wad of phlegm into the bowl just before turning to flush the handle. He walked out of the bathroom without stopping at the sink. Devin was looking in the open oven door at the cookie sheet filled a half-inch deep with browning hashish. The hot, piney skunk odor filled the room as he closed the oven door. Ned grabbed a mug from the cupboard while he lifted the coffee pot from its stand. He filled the cup halfway, then dumped 3 spoons of sugar into the cup, turned and pulled a milk carton from the refrigerator and a plastic half-gallon jug of cheap vodka. A dab of milk, then filled to the top with vodka. Ned gulped down a third of the hot brew before setting the cup down. Blonde? You cooking that blonde hash? Ned asked while running his forearm across his bristly whiskers to wipe off the sticky brew. Yeah, same stuff, Devin replied. I'm going to need some to take with me. I need at least half of it, Ned demanded. I want to give a big chunk to Kate and one to Mona, too. They both get horny on that blonde hash. I'll screw one tonight and one tomorrow night. Good luck, Devin said, thinking, fat chance of that happening. Devin and Ned both turned to the door in response to lights flickering in the dense trees across the driveway outside. The squeak and clang of spring and chain were dominated by the steady rumble of a slow-moving truck coming down the dirt road outside. Gravel crunched and the lights swung down the driveway as a 2-tone tan, 4-wheel drive Ford Bronco 2 pulled down, towing an olive-drab military-type trailer full of tied-down canvas-covered stuff. Devin walked to the door and turned on the floodlights, splashing light over the deck, onto the driveway, and the truck. A lingering cloud of dust rose into the darkness as it overcame the vehicle. The passenger up front shielded his eyes from the light as he stepped out. Hey, Rich, Devin said. Killer! Rich exclaimed in unison with Carter still in the car. Devin had earned that name several years earlier during a sandlot football game. Devin was built like a fire plug and he tended to charge an opponent rather than run from him. His barrel chest and round shoulders carried python upper arms. His forearms were like Popeye's. He had swept-back, orange-blonde hair with almost white eyebrows. His hazel eyes changed from light green to deep blue depending on his mood. He was covered from head to toe with red-brown freckles. His facial features were symmetrical and easy to look at. The nickname was due to his zeal, not his nature. Devin stepped down and shook Rich's hand while placing a hand on his shoulder. He noted a pained look in Rich's eyes and knew not to explore it just then. Devin leaned into the passenger door and greeted Carter. Hey, Carter, good trip? No problems. You ready to go? Yeah, 2 packs and a little stash and we're out of here, Devin said as he turned back to Rich. Stash? Rich said. You got some more of that Lebanese blonde hash? Yeah, hang on and I'll grab some. Devin didn't want to subject his friends to Ned and closed the sliding door behind him as he went back inside. Devin went into his room and slipped on some army fatigues and Velcro-strapped mid-level athletic shoes, then walked to the kitchen to grab some hash. Ned had gone back to bed and the cookie sheet was almost empty. A chunk about 4 inches square remained. Devin grabbed and bagged it and went out the door. Rich had loaded Devin's backpacks and jumped in the back seat with Carl. Devin stepped in the open passenger door and didn't bother to look around to the back seat. He needed to be in the front seat to give Carter directions. Who's got a pipe? Asked Devin. Carl shot his arm between the seats and produced a small hand-carved wood pipe and a lighter. Hashish, I'd love it, exclaimed Carter as he worked the hand controls to finesse the Bronco and trailer around the driveway and back to the road above. Carter's wheelchair was in the far back of the truck with Carl's dog, Zeke. Normally it would be kept directly behind Carter as he drove, but the truck was full of passengers. Carter had been paralyzed in an off-road rollover accident several years earlier. The doctors could find no evidence of a spinal cord injury beyond the fact that Carter no longer had use of his body from the waist down. It pissed Carter off that he didn't get a scratch or bruise. None of his passengers was even minimally injured in the accident, and the truck drove away with only one broken window. It didn't make sense. Carter was in his late 20s, a couple of years older than Rich and Devin, and several years older than his cousin Carl. Carter had dark skin around his brown eyes. He was pretty light-skinned otherwise. He was medium height and a little skinny. He wore his long, stringy brown hair to his shoulders under his baseball cap that hid his advanced male pattern balding. He had dark, thick, upswept eyebrows and sported a thick mustache and goatee that framed his thin lips. He needed glasses but didn't wear them. He thought of himself as the guy to know in the town he lived in. He sold the best green bud marijuana in town only to those that he deemed fortunate enough to fall within his graces. His family was comfortable enough to provide him with a house, which he kept in a constant state of filth and general disarray. They also purchased a video store to occupy his time. He stocked the store with a minimum of family videos for upfront perusal and had a large back room full of the best porn in town. The latest pornography was always on the TV at Carter's house. People would come over to buy a bag of buds and sit down for a couple of videos. In the meantime, Carter would guilt them into sharing their own stash as they watched, so they would have to return soon for their next purchase. "Hey man, how much of that you got?" Carter asked Devin. "You know I'll buy all that you can get your hands on." "I don't sell dope," Devin said. "No matter how many times you ask, you know I don't sell dope." "Well, fire it up then," Carl urged from the back seat. Rich was quiet for the 2-hour drive from Ned's house in Somerset to Ralston Ridge. Carl fell asleep after the second hit off the pipe. Zeke slept soundly, curled up in a ball in the back. Devin and Carter talked the whole time about gold. Rich and Devin had met while working together as contract pipe fitters on a shutdown in Richmond Chevron refinery less than a year earlier. Rich's father was the job superintendent and was one of the top supervisors at Chevron. Rich was sensitive to the common misconception, based on his relationship to such a powerful man, that he had not earned his position. In fact, Rich's father held him to a much higher standard. Rich didn't think he would ever measure up to his father or his expectations. Rich and Carter grew up in the same Methodist church, attending potluck dinners, youth dances, and summer camp. Carter stopped attending after the accident. Rich still attended some of the church gatherings from time to time, but not for the religious experience. He went so he could run into Robin. He had been in love with Robin since he was 6 years old. He wanted to marry her. He wanted to take care of her into her old age. She was constantly on his mind. However, he was afraid to ask her out. Rich was a little meatier than Carter, and his features were a bit more rounded, but he was not fat. He was plain in the face and spilled the same long, stringy brown hair out from under his baseball cap that he was rarely seen without. He, too, had advanced male pattern baldness. Devin wondered if there was something at Carter's house that made them both bald. Rich had a room at Carter's house just off the living room. His room was as messy as the rest of the house. He didn't dress in leather jackets and bright patterned polyester shirts like Carter. Rich wore more conservative work-type clothes that smelled of extended wear. Rich was bright and inventive, while Carter was cold and manipulative. "How long you think it'll take you to get down to the river?" Carter asked Devin. "Well, if you can get this rig all the way to the hydraulic mine, we should be at the river in less than an hour," Devin responded. "I thought you said it was a couple thousand feet in elevation below." "Going down is a cinch. Coming back up is a bitch. That may take the whole day. It's very steep." "I bet," Carter said. "You said last week at my house that only 10% of the gold is left." "No, I said that only 2% of the gold has been taken out. Those 49ers picked up everything they could see or stumble over. They didn't have the equipment we have today. Besides, I haven't found any evidence that anyone's ever dredged the part of the river that we're going to. It took me several months researching old claims, topographical maps, and geography books to find this place. I found that a glacier had carved this canyon back in the last ice age. It's called a tertiary channel. The glacier cut through the bedrock and pulled the gold out, scattering it along what has become the riverbed." "Yeah, I remember you talking about that," Carter said. "How much gold did you get last time you went down there?" "I got 3 ounces in one day. That's a lot. Most people stay in the river for months at a time and only start getting gold at the end of the trip. Best thing is, I got the gold from several pilot holes I scouted last time down. It wasn't from one spot. With Rich and Carl, we should be able to really work those areas and pull out a bunch of gold. Make sure Carl does some real work. You gotta watch him. He tends to goof off, Carter said, raising his voice enough to be sure that Carl could hear him even in his sleep. Slow down, this is it, Devin said to Carter as they passed under a set of power lines. Right up there. Where we pass under the second set, you'll be turning to your right up a dirt road. Carter slowed and pulled off the road and stopped. Devin jumped out to lock the hubs. Carter shifted into low and started up the dirt road. The truck bounced and teetered slowly down the old road that looked like it had seen few passages in many years. Branches screeched along the roof as the truck trundled on. After several turns and more than a mile and a half, the truck was still in the dark shadows of the overgrowth when Carter spotted the wood-filled ravine. Dozens of rotted logs were piled into a ravine to make a crossing possible. The logs had sunk deep and passage would be tricky. Rich, Carl, let's get out and direct Carter across the bridge, Devin said over his shoulder. They all jumped out and moved into position to direct and assist Carter's crossing. Carter went ahead slow, angling the route to give the trailer maximum flex through the dip. Zeke darted about inspecting the progress, offering no suggestions. The front wheel spun in jerks as Carter inched up the other side. Then the back wheel spun, chirping on the logs. The trailer box pushed in against the spare tire mounted to the back of the truck as it flexed through the dip. Carter gave a little more throttle as he felt the firm grip of all four tires on the uphill side and pulled ahead so the trailer was well out of the ravine. Yeah, all right, exclaimed Carl, running to the truck. Let's go, Zeke, back into the truck. Zeke bounded over the back seat as Carl opened the door. Carl stepped in and shut the door. You guys go on ahead, Devin shouted to Carter. Go to the end of the knoll and park on the right side. Rich and I will walk the rest of the way. We'll meet you. Carter gestured with a mock salute and continued on up the road. Devin and Rich followed on foot. The thick forest of old oak and scrubby pine trees began to open up just over the rise from the ravine. Bright sunshine streaked through the sparser branches, carpeting the dirt road in bright, broken light. Dust cast up from Carter's Bronco hung in the air, creating mystical patterns in the streaming rays of light. The temperature was rising fast in the dry morning. It was over 90 degrees and past 110 degrees in the next few hours. Within moments of driving off, Carter's truck could no longer be heard. In fact, there were no noises that one might expect so far out in the middle of nowhere. No birds, no wind, no insects. Just the sound of footsteps in soft, dusty soil and one's own open-mouthed breathing. Why so quiet, Rich? Devin asked. It's probably nothing. Devin took a couple more steps and then turned to Rich, grabbing his arm. It must be something. You didn't say a word the whole drive out here. Rich stopped and turned towards Devin, avoiding his eyes. I saw Robin coming out of Carter's room yesterday when I got home. She acted kind of funny. I don't know. It's probably nothing. I just got a strange feeling. Carter knows how you feel about Robin. He wouldn't. I don't think anything would stop him, Rich said, looking into Devin's eyes. He has to sleep with every woman he can talk into his bed. He's still trying to prove something to himself. The two continued on down the road. Devin said, No, I don't think Robin would be interested in Carter. She's too classy. I just can't imagine her sitting there watching him stick that syringe into his dick to get it hard. I can't imagine anyone. What the hell is in that thing that makes him hard? I don't know, Rich said. Whatever it is, it makes him hard for an hour, and plenty of women put up with it to ride him for an hour. Ah, disgusting, Devin said. Still, I can't imagine Robin doing that. You're probably right, Rich said. She did ask about you and Nanette. What happened to her anyways? You guys stopped coming over and then you moved up here. She didn't come home from work one day, Devin paused and then went on. At first I figured she had gone out with some people from work. I sat up all night waiting for her. When did she finally come home? She didn't. I started driving around the next day looking for a car. I went by your house and several others. I drove all over. Then I went home and waited through another night. I started to get scared. I called the hospital and police. 2 more days went by without sleep. I went to her work. They said she hadn't been in. Devin's eyes fell to gazing at the path, not looking at anything in particular. Then I called her mom in Philly, and she told me that Nanette did not want to talk to me, and don't call there again. She went back to Philly? Rich asked. Yeah. Why'd she do that? Did you guys have a blowout or something? We had spirited discussions from time to time, but nothing before she left. Actually, we talked about all kinds of stuff the night before she left. I was feeling quite domestic. We talked about where we were going to get married, here or on the East Coast. She told me that I'd have to go through some classes at her Catholic church. I told her I would, Devin said, looking into Rich's eyes. Damn. And she goes to work and doesn't come back, huh? Rich asked. So how'd you end up at Ned's? Looking down again, Devin answered. That house seemed to get colder. I just sat there thinking all the time, wondering what I did wrong. Why did she leave? It was driving me crazy. I needed to be around people, but I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I couldn't go to your house or anyone else I knew. They would ask questions that I was still working on. I needed to talk to someone that was interested in me, but not particularly interested in anything to do with Nanette. Devin focused his gaze on the tree line. I tried to find my ex-wife, Kelly. She still uses my last name. The phone operator inadvertently connected me to Ned Conrad's house. We talked. We realized that he was my father's cousin, and he invited me up. Once there, he suggested that I move in to get to know the rest of his family. That was last January. I've been there since. What'd you do with your house, Rich asked. Nothing. It's still there, cold as ever. I can't go back, at least not alone. Have you talked to Nanette recently? You're obviously still tied up about it. Yeah, I talked to her a couple of times. She acts like nothing happened. She's just going about her life. Rich lifted the brim of his cap and wiped the sweat from his forehead. What are you going to do? I want to go out there and see her face to face and find out what really happened. Problem is that Ned thinks that whatever money I have is his. He had a shit attack when I bought the dredge. A transcontinental trip would likely end in all kinds of drama. I'm not ready to leave Ned's house. I've gotten real close to his daughter, Dara. Is there anything going on there? Devin swatted at a mosquito buzzing around his mouth. No, not that I wouldn't want to. She's a little head-turner. Green eyes, dark skin, nice ass. She's fine. I'm just not ready to start anything. If I was, she'd be the one I started it with, though. They could see Carter's truck about 100 yards ahead, pulled off the road into a clearing on the right side of the knoll at the edge of the canyon. Carter was in his wheelchair unhooking the trailer while Carl was stacking the packs under a tree. Zeke was running around pissing on this and that. Devin and Rich passed a spring just off the road that ran all year long. Just downhill from the spring sat the scattered ruins of what used to be a large water tank. It must have held a couple of 1,000 gallons of water. None of the wood remained, just large metal bands that had run around the tank, and some metal valves and pipes, all rusty, half buried in dirt and grass. The tank had been used over 100 years earlier to run a hydraulic mine on the knoll below. Gravity-fed water ran through successively smaller diameter pipe to build up pressure and was shot out of a water cannon at the ground, washing the soil into sluice boxes that the miners extracted gold from. Devin and Rich followed the old pieces of pipe down to the knoll, passing Carter's truck and looking over the edge into the site of the old hydraulic mine. It was just a big washed-out bowl of dirt with well-defined runoff channel. That's where the sluice boxes would have been 100 years ago. The mine looked small compared to the rest of the view. This was Long Canyon. The ridge they were on was Ralston Ridge. The ridge across the canyon was called Nevada Point Ridge. Both ridges were covered with lush green oaks, pine, and a smattering of leafy trees. Long Canyon dumped into the Rubicon River. From the knoll you could see the ridges that surrounded the Rubicon River. The knoll sat at 4,400 feet in elevation. The Long Canyon River below them, not yet visible, was at 2,200 feet, 2,200 feet down. The canyon walls were almost straight up and down. There were very few routes into the river that could be made without scaling cliffs several hundred feet high. But here, the runoff from the hydraulic mine provided a steep ramp over some of the cliffs below. Carter climbed into the driver's seat and then turned and lifted his wheelchair into the seat behind him and closed the door. So I'll see you guys in 3 days, Carter shouted at Devin and Rich, still standing on the edge of the mine. I'll meet you right here. Devin and Rich walked back towards the truck, nodding their heads to Carter. Carter stayed in the truck and pulled away from the trailer slowly, watching it in his rearview mirror. Devin stepped up to the driver's door as Carter waved him over. Ready to head back, Devin asked. Got a long ride ahead of me, Carter said. Bust me off a piece of that hash, dude. Devin pulled the bag of hash out and broke off a piece to hand him. Carter stuffed his pipe, set it down, then pulled a black submachine gun-looking weapon from under his seat and passed it to Devin. It had a pistol grip, a long clip that held 35 rounds of 9mm. The barrel was covered by a heat-dispersing shield with round holes along its length. A long shoulder strap was clipped to it. It was a Tech-9. Serious-looking piece, Devin said. Stay safe, man, Carter said as he handed him 3 more clips full of bullets. 3 days. It was understood that the Sierra Nevada foothills of California were prime marijuana growing area. Any travel through risked encounter with growers that would not hesitate to punish trespassers, not to mention what people might be inclined to do if they thought you were carrying sacks of gold. Superior firepower was a necessary form of insurance. Before dark, Devin said to Carter. Make sure you're here before dark. Roger that, Carter said. Make sure that lazy bastard works, Carter gestured towards Carl as he pulled away. Jerk, Carl mumbled. Carter waved Devin over one more time and started to speak in hushed tones. I don't want him to return with us when I come back, pointing to Carl. I'll make it worth your while. Devin asked, What'd he do? He broke into our house last week and stole all my cash and buds. How do you know it was him? My neighbor saw him coming out of our house a few minutes before I got home. I'm serious, killer. I'll have a sack of cash for you when I come back if he's not here, Carter said sternly. Dastardly, Devin mused under his breath as he turned away. Carl met Devin a week earlier at Carter's house while Rich, Carter, and Devin were planning the trip into Long Canyon to dredge for gold. Carl was Carter's cousin. Carl's mother was Carter's father's sister. She could not afford to provide him with a house and a business to keep him out of trouble. It was tough to make ends meet on government assistance. That embarrassed Carl. She had to pick which bills rotated through the paid state each month, taking care to ensure that yellow-colored warning bills did not become pink-colored disconnect bills. Carter's father helped out his sister financially from time to time, but never to the extent that Carl thought he should. Why shouldn't Carl have it as easy as his cousin? Why couldn't he have been born to Carter's father instead of his poor white trash sister who seemed to have no hope? It just wasn't fair. Any family resemblance was lost on most. Carl had gray-blue eyes set in lily-white skin under a frizzy mop of dirty blonde hair. His lips were wide and often cracked. He was nearly 6 feet tall, and his knobby knees and elbows gave him a gangly look. He lived across the tracks in the bad part of town, and it showed in his gait and attitude. He wore what looked like third-generation thrift store fare. His face was crimped into a scowl unless he was playing with his dog or was passed out. There was a boyish sense to him that he fought to hide. Zeke was Carl's dog. No particular breed stood out in his mongrel pedigree. Salt and pepper short hair on a medium-sized long-eared mutt. He was full-grown but lumbered about like a Labrador puppy. His never-motionless tail battered many a knee and shin. Bubblegum pink droopy lips were speckled with black and spilled prodigious amounts of saliva. His eyes sparkled with the joy of being a dog. It took more than 20 minutes for Devin, Rich, and Carl to get the backpacks rearranged and their canteens full. They watched dust rise up near the asphalt road and knew that Carter had made it past the ravine and back to the road home. Carl carried the 3 sleeping bags and the 2 small pup tents that they would sleep in the next 2 nights. He also carried 2 large canteens and 4 lengths of 50-foot rope. Rich carried the cooking gear and the food, which was mainly made up of military sea rations and canned items. He also carried 2 small foldable shovels and a 2-gallon plastic gas container full of gasoline, with a canteen, and Devlin's Webley .45 caliber revolver with a holster. Devin carried the Keen backpack dredge with all the hoses and another 2-gallon gas can. He also carried the Tech-9, extra clips, 4 lengths of 50-foot rope, a canteen, and a round plastic snow sledding disc. The troop passed by the old hydraulic mine following the same trail that Devin had taken on the previous 5 trips down. A large dark bird soared a couple of 100 feet below them. It may have been an eagle or perhaps a hawk. The only sound was the rocks crunching underfoot. It was over 100 degrees and sweat poured from them. They each adjusted the brim of their baseball caps to shade them from the hot sun on the open trail. Devin took the lead, Rich next, then Carl. Zeke walked behind, his tail wagging furiously.